Welcome back to Family Twist. I'm Corey, and today's episode is one I've really been looking forward to. Our guest is someone you may remember from a powerful earlier conversation led by Kendall. It's author, advocate, and truth-teller Jean Widner. And this time, I get the honor of speaking with her because The Adoption Paradox, her book that's already sparked deep conversations within our community, is officially out in the world. This isn't just a book launch story, this is a conversation about what happens after the book is written. Jean opens up about the complicated reality of her ongoing search for connection, how grief and anger can exist right alongside compassion, and how the act of writing became, unexpectedly, a love letter to the mother who still can't meet her there. We talk about everything from sealed records and toxic loyalty tests to the marketing machine behind adoption in the US, and what it means to use your voice, your skills, and your pain for something greater. This is the kind of episode that lingers, so let's get right into it.
I imagine it was, what was the launch like? What was that first day out like for you?
Surreal, exciting, but surreal, to finally have something like that actually come into being, right? So it was, it felt really incredible and really amazing the first time I actually held my book in my hand, right?
Yeah. So when we last spoke, it was about a year ago, the Untangling Our Roots Summit was pretty fresh. And you had gone through that experience of hearing from your birth mother, not necessarily the news that you were hoping for. So take us from that moment into the book and how all these things sort of came together and what you did with those feelings.
I'm still processing those feelings. I mean, I certainly sat down and wrote about it. I released a couple of essays regarding that pain. I'm sad for me. Of course I am. You still hear reunion stories and you still hear about the wonderful relationships that people sometimes do have, or sometimes the ways that things can go sideways or get hard. And then sometimes end up in, separation again in the ways that they go, on. So there is a little bit of a time when I feel the pain or the pang of that jealousy and the pang of, I wish that would have been our story. And I wish I would know all of the little ways that we might have been able to know one another and connect. And so I feel sad about that. I feel also really angry sometimes at her in that she hasn't been able to really process this loss herself, which is what, of course, holds her in that place of denial of her own self and denial of her own joy. So I wish that she would have grown as a human being to the point, and I don't mean that in a patronizing way, but I really do want to just say, I mean, it's just so dang sad, right? That she is this woman at this part in her life, right? She's, hell, dude, I mean, I'm 60. Okay. She's 78. She's fully in the autumn, maybe even approaching the winter of her life. I'm certainly not yet in my autumn, but I can see it from here. I mean, just seize the day, right? Like take the risk, do the things, embrace the fear, just go for it. Because at the end of the day, that's what we all have to do. We have to figure out how to live our lives on our terms that work for us. And apparently these are her terms, and that's unfortunate. But I also fear that a lot of it is driven by her fear. And that makes me sad. Yeah. Does that make any sense? I sort of rambled there.
No, it absolutely does. And I think it's, I know Kendall has gone through this as well. And it's a roller coaster is really what it is. It's a never ending roller coaster.
Absolutely.
Was there part of you that hoped that when the book came out, she would hear about it and that might change things?
I'm not that naive. I think, I will still be sending her a copy of it for sure. I don't know that I'll sign it or anything. I'll probably order it off of Amazon so that way it just shows up at the house. And so that potentially protects her, because my understanding is that the people around her don't know, but can just be like, why is this here? Kind of thing. It's just a friend of mine who's a therapist, who's a really, really good friend. She said to me one day, she says, you realize this is one hell of a love letter to your mother, right? And I
Wow.
went, I hate you. No, not as in like, you know what I mean? But it's like, when like your best friends in the whole world are the ones who like, pull you up short and they're like, it's really about this other thing over here. You're giving
Right.
yourself this BS story that it's all about this, but really part of it's all about that, you
Yeah,
know?
we have those friends that can call us in our BS, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, as Kendall and I don't like to know everything going in, even when we're doing like a second round. So, thank you for providing us with a copy of the book, and I've gone through it, but I wanted to make sure I didn't know all the ins and outs because, then the interview's just not as good. So, when you heard that from your friend, that this is a massive love letter to your mother, what did you reflect on? Like, was it like a revelation, or was it like, damn, you figured it out?
It was definitely a revelation. It wasn't conscious, but I definitely, I mean, when it comes to the first mothers, the natural mothers, birth mothers, whatever label they are,
Yeah.
the way to anchor our understanding of where we all sit in the constellation, I really, really hope that that section is able to speak to the men and women who have been through this experience. I hope they feel honored and seen and understood because, as misunderstood, I think, as adoptees are in the constellation, I think those birth parents are really treading ground that nobody understands at all. They're either, turned into saints and brave and all of that sort of language that can sometimes become very toxic, or they're irresponsible parasites, draining on our society, and you should have known better, and all the cruelty that sort of gets thrown against them that way. And then all of this dual language, the idea that they're selfish if they want to keep their child, you know, a, a good mom is a birth mom, and some of the really terrible marketing techniques that you see out there. But doesn't everyone want to keep their child? And isn't a huge part of adoptive parents' motivations that they want a child? I mean, it's just the way that we warp this entire process and the language that we use toward everyone in their selective groups is sometimes, I think, really, it's, oh God, forgive the term, okay, but it's lipstick on a pig, right? We're trying to dress up a tragedy and put a bow around it and make everyone feel good about it instead of recognizing it as the tragedy.
Yeah.
And that's what our culture likes to do. We want a happy ending. We want a bow on it. And no, you can't put a bow on all this. You just can't, you know? And sometimes it does work out. And I know a lot of adoptees who are happy and they love their parents and they feel they were well raised. And I say, bravo, good. Glad that's your story. It's not everybody's story. And it's also still bigger than that because you're still missing other pieces in this whole thing. So,
Yeah. And that's something that it takes everyone to discover on their own. I don't think Kendall ever thought he would be having the feelings that he has, and so many of our guests, even the ones that do have the happy endings. The trauma is still there. The wound is still there.
absolutely. Yes. I'm glad for all of the really happy relationships that I see out there with birth families and their grown adoptees, and even most especially when the adoptive family is a part of that reunion. I'm glad for that. And I'm still sad that it was necessary in the first place.
Yeah.
So,
just touching on something you spoke about a few moments ago, in the book you write, if you judge her, you're judging me.
mhm.
Can you go into that?
Yeah, that's sort of a very base sort of impulse reaction, but I think it's true. Whatever our society thinks of our birth parents is actually what trickles down to us. I think that's where the entire treatment of our birth certificates comes from. I think it's where the entire notion of rescuing a child, and again, that very toxic language that gets built up about that. But the truth is, whatever you think of my mother is actually what you think of me, because that determines whether I need, with air quotes, to be rescued, which is a really terrible thing to say to a child and a really terrible thing to do to us. And if we fail to honor someone's nature, someone's historical namesake and their heritage, if you aren't honoring their biology and the very essence of who created them, if you fail to honor them, a kid feels that. And we feel that unconsciously. And then as an adult, we still feel it. I mean, if you think about it, like, who the hell ever created the idea of nature versus nurture, right? Why is it a competition? Why does our entire society not just see it as both? It's always both, because that's true in all of us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I hadn't really thought about it exactly like that, but yeah, it's really just nature and nurture. We've got enough verses going on in this world today. We don't need
Yeah.
to.
No, because we're always a combination of that. Even when you're raised by your biological family, I mean, you're always a combination of that.
Yeah. So, a couple of things that I love about the book is that it's community expanding. I mean, you've got a lot of voices in there, and some of the adoptees that you talk to who are going on their journeys had like guilt about doing that search, and that seems to be kind of a common thread through the book.
That is something that I think, I pose it as a loyalty test, but I think it's even deeper than that. I've even been working on unpacking some of that myself because, my parents got a lot right. My father is the one who was sterile, and he knew that as a relatively young man when he went into the Army, and they said, put it in a cup, and he did. And they said, you're shooting blanks. And he said, okay. So, that was something that he disclosed when he was courting my mom. And so they didn't have that trajectory of the infertility journey, wondering why they couldn't get pregnant and having to go through all of that heartache. They got married and he finished his PhD, and then they moved and got themselves set up, and then they went to an adoption agency. It was a very straightforward thing. But even with all of that, and even with all of the acceptance that my parents always gave to my birth mother, they never spoke negatively of her. My father would even say things like, I don't really think she had many choices back then, which, is a pretty revolutionary thing for a man to say in the 1970s, right? Even with all of that, I inherited the idea that somehow I was not worthy of her, that I was somehow not worthy of knowing my mother, my first mother, or interrupting her life, or showing up without an invitation kind of thing. I inherited that. And I don't, it wasn't from the people who raised me. It was from that society, the societal shame. And it was from also, unfortunately, the shame that I inherited in just, I don't know. I heard a wonderful woman, Anna Linde, talk about secondary shame and how we sort of absorb that in as adoptees, and the way that, again, our society then frames our existence for us, because we certainly don't have the words, and then our parents don't give us the words. So society frames up our expectations about who we are and what we are. And I absorbed that, and I walked that talk for 55 years. I never allowed myself to entertain it. And so that's my way into feeling like I wasn't going to be able to search. But you hear it and you see it. And then unfortunately, you do hear the interviews that I did with parents where, they did make it into a loyalty test, and they did make it into, well, only ungrateful adoptees or only bad adoptees want to search, or, and did, those kinds of manipulative things to their children, which I think is terrible. I mean, that's a horrible tragedy. So then of course there's no comfort. But that's the thing, is even those of us who aren't getting that BS hammered at it by our adoptive parents or family still feel this, and it's driven by love. It is driven by this deep-seated need to be accepted and loved and belong. And a lot of adoptees are just not going to take that risk. It's too scary to take that risk to say, I'm really thinking about my birth family, and I'd really like to know who my biological parents are and what my heritage is. And people can buy into medical history. It's a great catch-all. It's like, that's a thing that everybody can wrap their head around.
Right.
But all the rest of this is just as valid.
Yeah.
And it's getting our society to understand that and to make that leap. That's the hard work.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I think that's an important point. Yeah. People can understand, like, oh, okay, I get it. You only know half of your medical history or none of your medical history. And that's super, super important. But there's the right to know everything else.
Right.
And it's your right.
We created this process of altering our birth certificates based on principles in our society that are literally right now over a century old. And we have refused to evolve. We have absolutely refused to evolve. And the rest of the world is moving on. The rest of the world is figuring out, I was having dinner with a friend of mine who I serve as a fellow volunteer, and she's an adoptive mother and an adoption competent therapist. And she says, I don't understand why we can't just create a certificate of parentage. Why do we have to mess with the OBC in the first place? And it was like, and that apparently is like, for example, what France is doing is like your original birth certificate is there and then it grows. If for whatever reason those biological parents are not going to be able to raise that child because it's unsafe, another set of parents is going to take over. The birth certificate just expands. Why does it need to be replaced? And then if it's replaced, why does it need to be sealed?
Yeah. Right.
We're backwards at this.
Who is it really protecting?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So through your research and through the journey of putting the book together, were there some approaches that adoptive parents have taken to help their adoptive children start that reunification journey that were surprising to you or revelatory for you?
Not so much the reunion piece of it. I mean, again, it's always a good story when you have an adoptee whose adoptive parents are right on board and right there with them to say, how can I help? I talk a lot about the framework of, how adoptive families can best support their adoptee. And, of course, the first biggest, recommendation, and mind you, I want to put brackets on this to say it is not a panacea. It is not always a be all end all easy win. But of course, there is 20 to 30 years worth of research that says adoptees do better when they have some exposure to their natural biological family. That's better for them because you get that genetic mirroring and you get answers to your questions for why your family functions the way that it does and why displacement was necessary, assuming that it was. And again, we're going to put some brackets around that, but and then of course, then none of the nonsense of reunion is even required. If you have an open adoption that actually stays open, where hopefully the adoptee starts to gain increasing amounts of control over who they see and when they see and how they see them, I think you can, through all of that complexity, potentially create a healthier situation. Because if you go back historically, open adoptions were in fact the norm, that kids were often kind of co-parented. And there was this entire notion of a village can raise a child. It did used to be far more open. We're the ones in sort of the last century that closed it off because of all of the policies that are built around shame and secrecy. So, right, historically, we're actually the anomaly when you look at it throughout time.
Yeah, shame and secrecy.
Yeah, right. Like Rich says, Rich Arlab, he's like, yay, I want to be on teams shame and secrecy. It's like, no, you really don't. It's like, let's understand that truth and transparency needs to be the win. Yeah.
What has changed your outlook through this whole process of beginning the book, now through the book's release?
What has changed my outlook?
Yeah.
I got to be honest, it's hard to face the profiteering. It is really hard to face that we have a for-profit model of adoption in the United States and
Yeah.
that it functions just like an industry. You know, I mean, that's the thing that I often want to, say to people and kind of walk it back. It's like, listen, I'm not a therapist. I've never worked or volunteered in child welfare. Not a mental health professional. I'm also not even a journalist, right? I'm just a girl, an adoptee who just got really, really freaking curious. But what I also am, though, is an entrepreneur and a business person and someone who's worked in internet marketing for a really long time. And so in knowing something of what it takes to put together an online ad campaign and understanding the tactics that are used in and which I myself have been a part of in things like helping my travel agency rank so that
Yeah.
people can find them when they want a travel agent. I want them to find my travel agent because that's what my travel agent pays me to do. To sell garden fountains or meditation techniques or, for that matter, my own book, stuff, services, actual commercial enterprises. When I started to really dig into what was happening in the child welfare industry and what specifically was happening in the adoption industry, my stomach curdled because I'm looking at search engine optimization and Google ad placement and all of the things that me and my colleagues work in and around every day. And I'm watching that be applied to the idea of recruiting primarily expectant parents in some state of distress because they wouldn't be typing anything into Google regarding adoption if they were not in some distress.
Yeah.
And then watching them get reeled into a machine. That's really painful. Having to come to terms with that is really painful.
Yeah.
And so that's been probably one of my biggest transitions.
Yeah, there's definitely a dark side to marketing. And as one marketer to another, you're well aware. And that's, I think, maybe maintaining my journalistic integrity has helped me transition into marketing where I wouldn't be comfortable working for a tobacco company or whatever. But we know that the folks with the deep purses are going to be able to find the best people to get that message out there. And as well as I do, it doesn't take much. You could just be having a casual conversation with a coworker or a spouse or a sibling, and all of a sudden that stuff is popping up in your feeds.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine, working for an organization, but there are people out there that do it,
Right. Well, that's the thing is my husband and I have always had one credo, and it was use our powers for good, to do our best at decent companies run by decent people, or that we ourselves were out there, selling, because we owned a biofeedback guided meditation software company for 8 to 10 years and built that up and sold that off. So, again, it's nice to make money. It's also really nice to make money and do good at the same time. And so that's always kind of been our motto. And again, just pivoting into this industry and going, oh my God, like I know exactly what they're doing and I know how they're doing it and I know why they're doing it. And it's to, because so much of internet marketing is around helping people understand what the need is that your product can help them with, right? Like, what is the need that your niche or your product is trying to fulfill? That's not the issue in adoption. Everybody knows the need. The need is, I want to be a parent. That's the need. What the demand side of the ledger, what we have is a supply problem. Because imagine that. A lot of people don't want to give up their children. Shocking. And so then we're going to build up this entire language and this entire process of recruiting, again, expectant birth parents in distress. And Gretchen Sisson's book, Relinquished, shows us that a lot of those women aren't in need of it's not a whole lot of money to bridge the gap. right?
Mhm.
They're not saying, everybody says, well, raising children is hugely expensive. It's $100,000 or 200,000 or whatever. It's like, no, they're just talking about bridging the gap. Most of them are just talking about a financial bridge to get them from point A to point B so that they can get through this immediate situation. They just need a smidge, and it's not the whole thing. It's just this little bit, you
Yeah.
know. And and I know, and everyone listening knows single parents in their lives where, I mean, there's no question, single parenting is hard. Parenting is hard. It's easier with a duo, harder with a single. Okay, get that. But every single one of us knows someone where you're like, boy, this person is maybe going to have to grow up a bit. Maybe you do see them as a little bit irresponsible, or they don't make good decisions with their lives. And there's an entire pattern of behavior built up around that. And then you watch them become parents and you watch them change. It's like, that's the thing. And it's like, all of a sudden, 10 years later, you're looking back, they're square, their kids are doing great. Their life has changed that trajectory. And it was becoming the parent. It was that thing that made him go, oh crap, I got to get my stuff together.
Right.
Every single person listening knows someone like that in their sphere. And so I think that we have gotten really, really good at shooting each other down at all of our mistakes and all of the times when we've screwed up and we've done this and we've done that and you shouldn't have. And, you're such a loser, rather than just saying, okay, let's work the problem. What do you need? How can I help? I'm willing to do this and this, but not that and that. Let's just figure out how to help each other a little bit more. And I think we'd be doing better just overall, never mind in the scenario that we're talking about. But I think most especially in the scenarios where we're talking about, because so many women have just said so many times, if somebody would have supported me just a little, I would have been able to make a different decision.
Yeah. So I'm curious if you struggled with this at all. And because, as an author, of course, you want your book to be successful. So what does that mean? That means good reviews. That means sales. That means potentially profitability. But then on the flip side, it's a community building tool as well. Like, was there any kind of struggle with you? Like, oh man, like, should I really be rooting for a bestseller that make a little money on the side when really I'm trying to assist this community, to educate this community?
Oh, I'm so far in the hole financially. Don't tell my husband. I really would need something extraordinary to actually even break even. So we're a long way from the ledger on that one. Not that I would mind if it happened, but I mean, it's like, but, here's the thing. I genuinely believe and have already had people tell me that my book has helped them. And I genuinely believe that I wrote this book in no small part to be a conversation starter. And I wrote it not just for our community, but for those beyond. And, I just got a message on Facebook the other day from a friend of mine. She was a good girlfriend in high school. Our lives went in vastly different directions, so we lost touch. And then Facebook put us back in touch, and some high school reunions put us back in touch. We've always remained not close, but in that periphery of a good friendship. I know she's a teacher, and she bought my book and then just wrote me this message like, oh my God, like, thank you so much for writing this, because she does have adopted people in her family. As a teacher, of course, she's encountered, foster care and looked after children as well as adoptees. And then her daughter apparently had just had a child who was premature. She says to me, oh my God, that primal wound is real. She's like, when my daughter holds her baby needs less oxygen. And she's like, thank you for writing this book, because I've learned so much. And so, yes, marketing a book is actually really harder than writing a book, for sure. Marketing a book is a pain in the ass. It is hard. Right now, I'm not going to apologize for trying to do anything and everything that I can to get this book into as many hands as I can, because I feel like it can help people, and I feel like it can shift the dialogue. For those who are willing to openly read it, I feel like they come away looking at adoption differently than they ever have. And so that's my hope.
Yeah, I hear you. I had to overcome a little bit of imposter syndrome because being a supportive spouse, not being an adoptee or an NPE, I had to get over that mindset. Just because we're doing a podcast and we want it to do well, I shouldn't feel guilty about that because we are doing it for the right reasons. We didn't have any expectations when we started this 3+ years ago. The feedback we've gotten from folks like you and so many others, we're on to something here. And would it be such a bad thing for Kendall to be able to switch gears mid-career and this be the thing that he retires on, working within the communities? I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, I want to keep working in digital and traditional marketing just because you always got to keep learning, and who knows what the trend's going to be tomorrow, what the algorithms are going to look like, all of that jazz, And I still enjoy it. I still get really excited about stuff. Like the behind the scenes, the marketing and stuff like that. Kendall's like, ugh, I would not enjoy this part. I'm like, oh, I love this. I love, look at these statistics and figuring this stuff out. And marketing a book is very tough. Marketing a podcast is very tough. Sure. And the tactics and the channels and everything are continuing to change. So, yeah, I don't think you should have any guilt at all about using smart tactics or whatever to get your message out there in front of people.
Sure.
Because the bad guys are doing it too.
Good point. Good point, because I did get an introduction to someone who has a podcast that was covering the foster care side of things. And it was a very strange email exchange. But, the guy actually said to me, well, and if we get into any of the cons, I want to make sure that we end on the pros. And I went, And because it was a strange email exchange anyway, and he was literally wanting me to record in like 2 days. And I thought to myself, I think I'm going to pass.
Yeah.
Because I really didn't have any confidence that the interview was going to be what I would really want it to be, which is an honest conversation about both.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So I turned it down.
Well, to me, that's a sign of I'm not a great journalist. That's not how you want to let the story unfold naturally. You don't go in there trying to drive the story a certain way. Not if you're a good journalist. The story's it's going to be a good story if you're a good journalist.
Right. And that's, which is exactly what I say about, the twists and turns that this book took for me. This is where the stories and the research led me. This isn't the book I started out to write. It is literally not the book I started out to write.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, I know you're doing the right things for the right reasons, so we appreciate that. And I would love just to touch a little bit on community because, as we all get to know each other, it's become, such an important aspect of our lives now. And I won't go into specifics, but just this week, seeing somebody within the community that was kind of going through a struggle, and just to see all these familiar names pop up of, with messages of support and things like that, it's like, oh, okay, all right, this is why. This is why. And this is healing,
Absolutely. I mean, there are so many really good organizations out there that I think have facilitated the ability for us to have more honest conversations. And I think that even again, just that casual support, that's out there on social media. A friend of mine knows a woman who works at the place that I was doing the book signing, and who unfortunately did not have a good adoption experience. She was abused by her adoptive parents and is now estranged from them. Because my friend had been with me on my journey of writing the book, and she literally read every damn word that I wrote. She and my mother-in-law read everything. And then this woman meets her. She's able to pretty quickly realize that, oh, this woman is having a much different conversation with me than the typical, oh, isn't that great? You were adopted, blah, blah, blah. And so I got to meet this young woman then at the place where I was doing the book signing. And then I'm like, hey, there's a support group that's coming back into prominence. You know how it is. These things ebb and flow, but there's a new person who's took it under their wing. And I'm like, do you want to join us? We're getting together here in July, blah, blah, blah. She's like, oh yeah, boom. There we go. Putting someone in community who didn't know there was one. And the thing is she probably just sort of tucked her story in like she probably has so many other times in her life.
We came up with sort of a final question that we ask all the guests here because we have one for our other podcast. Kendall and I are huge music lovers. When you're deep in the feels and you're going through it, is there an artist or a song that you kind of turn to?
Oh, there's a song. Fast Car. Tracy Chapman. That, a feeling that I belonged, that I could be some, you know, that for me is a very powerful and soothing song, even though it's not mine. There are the elements of the story of that song that are not mine. And yet I do know what it's like to feel like, I got to leave tonight or I'm going to die this way. I've got to get out of this place and get to a different one and try to do now with growth and, wherever you go, there you are. That is one of my songs for sure.
It's been so nice reconnecting with Eugene, and of course, stay in touch. We're friends, we're family, we're part of this community together. Happy to support your book launch. Keep us in the loop as things progress. If a second book is out there somewhere or something else, definitely keep us in the loop.
Thank you so much. It was so great to be back on here with you. I really appreciate it.
Jean Winder does not flinch from the hard truths, and that's exactly what makes her book, The Adoption Paradox, and this conversation so necessary. Whether you're deep in the adoption constellation or just beginning to understand it, her words challenge us to do better, feel deeper, and confront the systems and silences that keep so many stories hidden. If you're still thinking about the line, if you judge her, you're judging me, you're not alone. That one hit me hard. And Jean's perspective on community, on marketing with integrity, and on the power of connection reminds us that healing doesn't just happen alone, it happens when we find each other. You can learn more about the book at adoptionparadox.com. And if you know someone who thinks adoption is only about happy endings, maybe send them a copy of the book. Until next time, remember, family secrets might be the ultimate plot twist, but in the telling, we get to write the next chapter ourselves. Family Twist Podcast is presented by Savoir Faire Marketing Communications and produced by How the Cow Ate the Cabbage, LLC.